Good afternoon, everyone. It is Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It is the 15th of February. We're getting ready for Parshas Mishpatim, and I'm looking forward to sharing some sources with you on this Parsha. Let's jump right in. Parshas Mishpatim contains an incredible amount of material, so we're going to scratch the surface, but hopefully we'll see some items which you'll find very enlightening and enriching. So, of the items that come up in this parsha, we find as follows. In Perek Chaf Aleph, that's chapter 21, the psukim tell us there's three psukim in a row. It says, Umakei aviv ve'imo mos yumas. If someone strikes either their father or their mother, they should be put to death. Next pasuk, V'gonev ish umecharo. If someone kidnaps another person, v'nimtza biyado, and kidnaps and sells that person, v'nimtza biyado, and is found in his possession, Mos yumas, the kidnapper will be put to death. And also one who curses the father or mother will be put to death. So again, look at these three psukim. We've got Pasuk Tezvav, that's 15, telling me about the terrible problem of someone who strikes their mother or father. Then I have the next Pasuk, 16, talking about kidnapping. Then I have 17, coming back to being disrespectful to a parent, is one who curses their mother and father. The obvious question that so many of our commentaries are bothered by is, those should be listed together. If I was writing the Torah, I would have had Pasuk Tesvav, verse 15, then Yud Zayin, 17. Talk about those two criminal activities towards parents. Have one Pasuk tell me about striking a parent, have another Pasuk talking about cursing a parent. When I'm done talking about all of the ungrateful and disrespectful ways someone could treat a parent and what the punishment is, then I'll come back to kidnapping. Why is kidnapping stuck right in the middle there? It seems to be breaking up the flow. This is a question that you'll find many of our commentators deal with. I want to share with you a couple of approaches that are out there. We'll start with the Ramban, the great Nachmanides. Ramban, let's look at him inside. It's, I don't believe I brought down, maybe this is the entire piece. I think it is the entire piece of the Ramban. Let's look at it together. Ramban says, someone who strikes their mother or father will be put to death. Kfar lamdu chachamim, our sages have taught us, shemisaso bechenek. So we know that the Jewish courts, when it came to the death penalty, there were a couple different ways that they could put someone to death. One was skila, death by stoning. Another was sreifa, death by burning. There was chenek, death by strangulation. And then there was herek, death by the sword, decapitation. So what death is it that someone who strikes their mother and father, which death do they face? So it says, Kfar lamdu chachamim, our sages taught us in the Gemara that someone who strikes their mother or father and they meet all the criteria to be found guilty, which are hard to meet, but they meet them, misaso bechenek. The manner in which they are put to death is chenek, through strangulation. And that's why samach lo v'gonev ishu macharo. That's why the juxtaposition, that's placed right next to kidnapping. Shagam hu ba'oso misa, because the penalty, the death for the capital punishment for someone who's found guilty for kidnapping another member of Klal Yisrael and selling him is also death by chenek, by strangulation. The hifrish, and that's why it's used to separate mekalel avi ve'imo, to separate the punishment that's in the next pasuk in 17 about someone who curses their mother or father. Ipneshu beskila, because the Gemara tells us the penalty for cursing a parent is skila, is stoning. So what Ramban is telling us is as follows: that he's quoting the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that the Gemara was sensitive to this. The Gemara wants to know, why does the Torah list these admonitions in the order in which it does? And what the Gemara answers is, it's not an accident. It listed them this way on purpose. That first it says, Makei avivi momos yumas, because that the punishment, that type of misa is chenek, strangulation. Then it lists the gonev, it talks about gonev ishu macharo, kidnapping another member of Bnei Yisrael and selling that person, because again, that's a mos yumas. That's also a capital punishment if all the criteria are met, and the punishment is chenek. And only last does it say Mekalel Aviv Imo, someone who curses their mother or father. And that why is that one separated? Because of skila. That's penalty, that mosimas, that death penalty is skila, death by stoning. So it's not an accident the way the Torah lists these three admonitions. It was done on purpose. It groups them together based on the punishments. So that's what the Ramban is quoting, what the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin. Then it says, Shenemar, how do I know that someone who curses their mother or father, the death is by stoning? Shenemar bo aviv imo, kalal damav bo, kilal damav bo. It says that they cursed their mother or father, their blood is on their head. That's what we find in Vayikra, in Sefer Vayikra. Whenever we see damav bo, that someone's blood is on their own head, they brought about their punishment. That's code word for skila, death by stoning. We know that from later else, somewhere else in Sefer Vayikra, where it says specifically, it says that the penalty is death by stoning, and then it says Demehem Bab, their blood is on their head. So whenever it says blood is on their head, that's how we know the death is by stoning. So now we know why the Gemara tells us, why we know why the Torah lists these three admonitions in the order in which it did. The first two are grouped together, that of striking one's parent, followed by kidnapping and selling another Jew, because there the death penalty is that of chenek, by strangulation. Finally, it says mekalel, cursing a parent. And why? Because there the death penalty is different. There it is by stoning. Okay, so now we've got an answer. Ramban quoted the Gemara to tell us the answer as to why the list of those admonitions is in the order in which it is. Okay, now the question is, why is it a different punishment? Someone who strikes their parent is chenek, strangulation. That's the death penalty. Someone who curses the parent is skila, death by stoning. Of all the forms of death and the death penalty, the Gemara tells us the most severe is stoning. That's like the longer death. The person is first pushed off a cliff and then he's stoned. So why is the punishment different? When it comes to someone who strikes their mother and father and they're found guilty, they lined up all of the issues that would be there to meet the requirements of getting dealt the capital punishment. There it is chenek, strangulation. But if they curse the parent and everything lines up, there it's death by stoning, which is a much more severe punishment. Why? What's different? What's the difference between cursing and striking? So that's the second paragraph. God tells us in the psukim that the punishment, the capital punishment, which is meted out against someone who curses their parents, is worse than the capital punishment that's meted out against someone who strikes their parents. Why? So he says it's more common. If you had to compare which one will happen more often, striking a parent or cursing a parent happens a lot more often. A person will curse a parent quicker than they would strike a parent. Shakasil kasher yichos, someone who's foolish, once they get angry, these safe and they get all upset and enraged, the kilel b'malko uvaviv, they will quickly curse their king or their father, v'imo, or their mother. Tamid kol hayom. That'll happen on a daily occurrence. If someone's got anger management problems, they will be very prone to yelp out a curse. V'avera kafi mitziyusa tamid, and since that avera can happen and it's so common, tzricha yisur gadol. It needs a greater sense of prevention. It needs a greater warning, you might say, or it needs more of an incentive not to do it. It needs to be discouraged more. So how are we going to discourage someone from committing a crime? By saying the punishment is really bad. We need a disincentive. That's the word I was looking for. It needs a greater disincentive. So how are we going to disincentivize someone from cursing their parent? By saying the punishment is so much worse. So meaning what? If someone might get upset at their mother or father, which one are they more prone to do, to curse or to strike? They're more prone to curse. So therefore, we need to have a stronger disincentive to get them not to do that. So the Ramban says that's his theory into why is it that the Torah comes down harder on cursing a parent than it does on striking a parent, because it's more likely to happen that someone will curse a parent. Therefore, we need a stronger disincentive. That's his first theory. Second theory, another theory as to why there might be a more severe punishment, a harsher death penalty for cursing than it is for striking. Maybe it's even a greater sin Shehi ba'hazkaras Hashem. Because in order to really curse a parent and to do it in a way that would be deserving of a death penalty, they have to also mention God's name. So they've done, so to say, two things wrong. They've cursed the parent and they've taken God's name in vain. Therefore, he says, so he says, now we understand why he needs a more severe punishment, because they've compounded what they've done. Not only have they lashed out against the parent, but they've done a second thing. They've now brought God into it, and they've mentioned God's name in vain. So there's a second reason as to why the punishment might be more severe for cursing a parent than it would be for striking a parent. So that's fascinating. So if we pause right here, what the Ramban has told us is that it's not an accident, the order of the psukim. It makes total sense. And then B, he gives the logic for it. It's not an accident. It's a different punishment for striking a parent than it is for cursing a parent. So first we say striking a parent, and then we have kidnapping another Jew because that punishment is the same of chenek. And then we have, which is strangulation. And then we list cursing a parent because that's another punishment. That is death by stoning. That is skila. Okay. Then he said, what's a logic behind this? What's a rationale? Why the punishment should be worse for cursing a parent than it is for striking a parent? He gave us two reasons. One is it's easier to fall into that trap. Someone in their fit of rage might be more prone to curse a parent than to strike a parent. So therefore, we needed a greater disincentive to make sure someone doesn't do that. And the second idea is it might be worse to curse a parent because then you've brought God into it and you've uttered his name. Someone who's done this has uttered his name in vain. Therefore, it might be deserving of a greater punishment. Okay, fascinating. Let's see the last point that Ramban makes. Now he goes, Vagon Rav Sadia. So Rav Sadia Gon, so he wants to go back on that first paragraph. He wants to say another idea, besides for what the Gemara said. The Gemara gave an idea as to why the order was the way we see it in the Torah. Why is it that the order is make avivimo, striking a parent, and then you've got gonev nefesh, then you've got the case of the kidnapper, and then you've got mekala, the one who curses a parent? When it looks like something's out of order, why don't you group them together? So he says, Rav Sadia Gon had a different answer than what the Gemara says. Look what Rav Sadia Gon suggests. The Sadia Gon said as follows: Ki hichnes davar agonev ish benem. Makes total sense to start with striking a parent, then go to the kidnapper, and then go to cursing a parent. But it makes sense to interrupt them with the kidnapper. Why? Bavur ki ala rov, by and large, someone who's caught up as being a kidnapper, hanignavim em katanim, who gets kidnapped? It's usually kids. That's why it's called kidnapping. No one takes a full-grown adult and tries to abduct them, because chances are they'll fight back, or even if they'll escape, they'll know how to get back home. If someone wants to pull off a successful kidnapping and then sell that person as a slave, they usually go for a child. That's who they steal. They'll put up less of a fight. It's less likely that they'll have this pull to return home and know how to get home. It might just be easier for the long haul in terms of it's an atrocious crime. It's absolutely abhorrent. But he's saying put yourself in the mindset of the kidnapper. It makes more sense to kidnap a child than it does an adult. So he says, Ki ala rova nignavim, most of the time, the ones who get stolen, the ones who get kidnapped, him katanim, are children, are kids. That's hence the word kidnapping. V'yigadlu, and once they're stolen as kids, that means they end up growing up. V'yigadlu, they're raised or they grow up in makom acher, in a place different from home, in a different city, in a different locale. V'lo yakiru avosam, they have no idea who is their mother, who is their father. They were torn away from their parents. Awful. V'yavo, and therefore it could actually happen. Sheyakum v'yikalulum, they could end up striking them. They could end up cursing them. What Rav Sadia Gon is suggesting is, very few people in their right mind would strike a mother or father, would curse a mother or father. How could someone do that? This is the person who brought him or her into this world. This is the person who nurtured them. What could possibly lead to someone striking or cursing a parent? It must be, who's more likely to do this? Someone who was kidnapped as a child. Therefore, they have no memory who was their mother, who was their father. So later in life, when they get into a fight with someone, they might curse that person. They might strike that person. Because they don't even realize that's their mother, that's their father. They're not intentionally striking out against the mother or father. They're striking out at this person, cursing this person because they got into a quarrel, into a fight, whatever it was. Why are they doing this? Because they don't even realize that's their mom, that's their dad. They don't know who that is. So the pasuk is telling us, you know why we inserted the ganav, the kidnapper, right in the middle of this? Because to tell us a kidnapper deserves the same death penalty, I should say, deserves the same capital punishment, not the same form, because we said one is going to get skila, one's going to get chenek, but deserves the death penalty, the onish hu alav. It is his fault. It is the fault of the kidnapper that there's a kid out there who's ever going to curse the parent or ever strike a parent. Therefore, that's how we know, that's how it's logical that the kidnapper also has the death penalty. That's what Rav Saadia Gaon says. So again, it's a fascinating answer. It's tragic, but it makes so much sense. And that is a different explanation than the Gemara. Again, the Gemara wanted to give an explanation as to why the kid is, why the psukim are grouped the way they are. And now Rav Saadia Gaon has a different explanation. Fascinating, tragic at the same time. What I want to share with you is that once we get into this conversation that the Ramban raised in his second paragraph, when the Ramban was saying in the second paragraph, he was saying that why should a punishment be worse for cursing a parent than it is for striking a parent? We're used to that adage, sticks and stones could break my bones, but names will never hurt me. So we're used to that adage that words are less offensive than deeds. So it seems very strange that the Torah says the punishment for striking a parent, which is deed, is chenek, which is a death penalty, but it's a quicker death than the death penalty for cursing a parent, which is skila, which is stoning, which is a slower death that's viewed as being more severe. So it's very hard to understand. So the Ramban gave us two theories in that second paragraph. The first theory was it's more likely if someone's frustrated at a parent, it's more likely that they'll curse a parent than that they will strike a parent, because a person might bring themselves to curse that parent, but to actually take up their hands and fists and to beat them, come on, that's more unlikely. So since it's more common for someone to curse a parent, therefore we needed a greater disincentive. That was the Ramban's theory, his first theory in that second paragraph. That made me think about something I saw last week. And I want to share that with you. That's the next source. On the bottom of page 1, going back last week to the Aseres HaDibros, that in the Aseres HaDibros, the fourth commandment was Kabed Savicha V'Asimecha, that we have to honor our mother and father, our father and mother. So the Torah says, Kabed Savicha V'Asimecha, the bottom of page 1, Lamani Arichon Yamecha. And if you do this, God says, I will bless you with longevity. God says, I'll bless you with longevity. It's important. Kabed Savicha V'Asimecha, and I'm telling you, I'm going to bless you with longevity. I saw a beautiful idea in the Tosefes Bracha last week. Tosefes Bracha is Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein, and Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein, he points out two questions on this dibra, on that command, on that utterance in the 10 Commandments and 10 utterances of that dibra, of that one. There's something that's there's something that's unique about it. He's got two questions. Let's see what he says. So in the Tosefes Bracha, again, this isn't the entire piece, but it's the relevant paragraphs we're going to look at. Laman Yarichon Yamecha. God says, as a reward for honoring one's parent, I will bless you with longevity. So he says, Dorish Lavin, it really requires us to examine and to think about, Lama Rak B'dibur Zeh, why is it only with this one of the 10 Commandments? Why is it only here? B'dibur Zeh, Nemar Matan Schar B'tzido. Hashem tells us right here what the reward is. The Torah told us in the 10 Commandments, only by one of them does it say what the reward is. It's only by Kabed Avicha V'Asimecha. It doesn't say by Lo Signov, and if you keep this, Laman Yarichon Yamecha, I'll give you longevity. No, it only says it by Kabed Avicha V'Asimecha. Why? Why all of a sudden here? Why here does God have to tell us what the reward is? Lo kama b'chol hadibros. Not by any of the other commands do we see such a thing. The second point that needs to be clarified is Tam lama bachar schar mitzvah hazos barichas yamim. Why did God choose as the reward arichas yamim, longevity? Below ba'achas hatovos v'habrachos shebolam. He could have picked any other reward, any other blessing. Why specifically did he pick this? That's a good question. So the first question is that Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein is asking is, of all the 10 Commandments, why is it only by Kabed Savicha V'Asimecha? Is it that we find the reward written there? And number two, if you are going to write a reward, why is this reward chosen about longevity? So let's deal with one question at a time. First question. Vinay al Rishona, dealing with the first question about why is it only here by Kabedes Avicha Vasimecha, why is it only here that we find the reward given? Lamarak b'mitzvah zu ba matan schar b'tzida. Why here? And all that Seres Dibros is the only one where it says what the reward is. Efshar la'azbir, I can explain as follows. The nature of the human being is anything which I'm constantly around. I begin to lose my appreciation. We know that that true adage that says distance makes the heart grow fonder, and also familiarity breeds contempt. The more I'm around something, not only don't I appreciate it, I eventually might despise it. But the further removed I am, I'll appreciate it more. Next line, and sometimes not only do I not have the proper appreciation for something I'm always around, but sometimes it becomes a burden. Like, oh my God, I got to continue dealing with this. So it sometimes can breed contempt. V'yadua, and it's well known, as soon as a human being enters the air of God's green earth, Hoktin alav avivimo, his father and mother are in their lives. Below heref, without any pause, below hefsek, there's no break. A person from the minute they're born, they're always around their parents. Maybe because a person's constantly in the presence of their parents, they'll come to belittle the parent. They will come to say they won't have such honor for the parent. They won't have such such love for the parent, because familiarity breeds contempt. They're always around the person. They take them for granted. We see this all the time, not just with parents. How many times is it that all of a sudden a visiting rabbi comes to some community? Ooh, does that person get covered? But when the person's back home, do you think he's getting that type of covered? I guarantee you they're not. I guarantee you, whenever you see one of these scholar in residence, if they're a rabbi in their own shul, I guarantee you their own shul is not mechabed that person, because they're around them all the time. They know what his dirty shirts look like. They heard a bad drasha every now and then. But when it's a scholar in residence, ooh, this is special. This is someone new coming to town. Ooh, let's roll out the red carpet. We see that all the time. That's the way it works. He says that's the way it could be with our parents. We're around our parents all the time. Eventually, we don't respect them as much as we should. And he says as follows. He says, L'chein matzah Torah, therefore the Torah has to incentivize us. L'nachon lahosif l'mitzvah zu od schar atzmi. Hashem says, I understand, I'm asking a lot in all these 10 commandments, but in one of them, in command number 4 of Kabedes Avicha Vasimecha, I'm asking you to have kavod and respect for someone, for an entity, for your mother, for your father, who you are always around. And human nature is, the more you're around them, the less respect you show them. So Hashem says, I want you to keep this mitzvah. And by keeping this mitzvah, how am I going to incentivize you to keep this mitzvah? To say you're going to get something out of it. So the Tosefet's bracha is saying, that's why I answered the first question. Why, of all the mitzvahs in the 10 commandments, why is it only by Kabedes Avicha Vasimecha is there an incentive given about Lamani Arichon Yumecha? Because that's where I need it. That's the only one that I'm constantly around, that I'm familiar with. And you're asking me to respect and to show kavod, to show ava. How am I going to do that? So Hashem says, I know human nature, so I'm going to put in an incentive. So that's what he says there. And by the way, so look how this dovetails so beautifully what we saw in the Ramban. The Ramban was saying that, again, because familiarity breeds contempt, the person's always around the parent, and if they get frustrated, they're more likely to curse than they are to hit. So Hashem has to disincentivize that by offering a more stringent death penalty for Mikalo, for cursing, than for hitting. Here's the flip side. So when I'm asking to show kavod, I know it could be a challenge sometimes, so I have to incentivize it by saying, Laman Yarichon Yamecha. Look at this, how Hashem understands human nature. Fascinating. Look at one more paragraph here. So he says, once we lay out this principle that the more we're around something, the less we respect it, and we might eventually become to have a feeling of contempt towards it. Familiarity breeds contempt. Now we could also understand a pasuk that seems a little bit tricky in Parshas Bechukosai. It says over there, "V'nasati mishkani b'sochechem." God says, I will, if you follow in my instructions, you keep your end of the covenant, Bnei Yisrael, so then I will set up my lodging, I will set up my mishkan, I will rest my presence b'sochachem, in your midst. V'lo sigal nafshi eschem. And then God says, he adds, not only will I live in your midst, I won't become disgusted by you. How are these tied together? Hashem's saying, if you do what you're supposed to do, I will dwell in your midst, and also I won't become disgusted by you. Where did that come from? But now, based on what we said, it makes total sense. Hashem Mishkan, that name that God's going to reside in our midst, Moral Shechina Tamidis, that means He will always be around us. Like we say, Shochenad, that you're constantly here. God is telling us, even though I'm going to set up my presence to constantly be in the midst of Bnei Yisrael, even with all that, I will not become disgusted by you, Bnei Yisrael. I'm going to act differently than the nature of a human being. Because the nature of a human being is when you're constantly around the other party, you begin to lose those feelings of endearment. And sometimes it goes beyond just losing the feelings of endearment. It breeds contempt. Familiarity breeds contempt. And distance makes the heart grow fonder. Those are human concepts. That's human nature. That's not God's nature. So what the Torah Tamima, what the Tosefet's Bracha here is telling us is that now that we understand why Hashem gives an incentive by Kabedes Avicha V'Asimecha, because God's saying, I know human nature. I know familiarity breeds contempt. I know distance makes the heart grow fonder. So it could be a big ask to tell you Kabedes Avicha V'Asimecha, so I have to incentivize it. So now Rabbi Baruch Levi is saying, now this is beautiful. We understand B'chukosai why Hashem says, I'll dwell in your midst and I won't become disgusted by you. Meaning what? God's saying, I don't have human nature. I have the capacity to dwell in your midst. I'll be all around you. I'm familiar with you, but it won't breed contempt. I don't need distance to make my heart grow fonder. I'm not a human being. That's what he's saying. This is beautiful. So that's what he says. Okay, let's look at the last paragraph. So at this point, the Tosefet's Bracha has answered his first question. First question about why of all the Aseres HaDibros, why is it just Kabedes Avicha V'Asimecha? Why is it just that one that needed an incentive? Good, because of human nature, and therefore a person could end up resenting their parent. So therefore we need Laman Yarichon Yamecha, we need an incentive. But the second question was, no, why Laman Yarichon Yamecha? You could have said, I'll make you rich. You could have said, I'll make you happy. I'll give you a good meal. I'll make you a good cholent. Whatever it is, where does it come from? Laman Yarichon Yamecha. So look at this last paragraph. Why does God say that the reward for Kabedes Avicha V'Asimecha is specifically Arichas Yamim? Why is it specifically Arichas Yamim? Why is it longevity? No, none of the other great benefits that are able to come out in this world. After Lomar, what he can say is as follows: Mishum deschar zehu besug mida keneged mida. God's saying, I'll repay you mida keneged mida, measure for measure. Kim yichabed aviv v'imo. If someone respects their mother and father, yizkel arichas yamim v'yichabdu lechavod ziknaso. If someone really shows proper respect for their parent and takes care of his or her needs, so then the result is the parent ends up living longer. They're in better health. They're being taken care of. So by a person taking care, showing respect and love and honoring their parent, they're causing their parent to live on. So he says, therefore, it's Mida Keneged Mida. That's his first angle. It's Mida Keneged Mida, that if the parent lives longer, so what's the reward for that? The child should live longer. Beautiful. But then he says, adds another piece. But Gam Ev Shalomar, he could also say as follows, Mishum ki kafia yadua b'tivei b'nei adam b'chlal. He says, unfortunately, he says he's seen this, and I think we've all seen this and experienced this to some degree as well. And he says in parentheses, let me qualify this. This isn't true of everyone. We all know this is not true of everyone, but we know a lot of people that the following idea is true of. If the parents are wealthy, the kids want the Yerusha, the kids want the inheritance. How many times have we heard this? Is that the parent is already old and feeble, and the children are thinking, oh my gosh, the longer this parent stays in the nursing home, it's eating up the inheritance. Maybe, wouldn't it be nice if this person would just exit the stage already? Unfortunately, we've heard people express this before. Let's say the parents are not wealthy. There's no Yerusha, but rather they're poor. So then, the longer the parent lives on, it's more of a drag. It's more of an expense on the children. both ends of the spectrum, whether the parent was very wealthy or whether the parent was very poor, the children many times don't want the parent to live long because it's going to either eat up the inheritance or cost the kids an arm and a leg. But if the children follow through with the command number 4 and they show kavod to their parents, and they want to do everything they can to provide their parents with a good life so they could live longer. God says, I'm going to reward you mida keneged mida, measure for measure, mida keneged mida. Beautiful idea. So the reason why he's suggesting of all the Aseres HaDibros, there's only one that has the reward of Kibbut Avayim and not the others, because that's the one where an incentive is necessary. That's the one where a child might say, they don't want to respect the parent. Familiarity bred contempt. So they're sick of that parent. They don't want to show kavod. Okay, so good. I understand why that one needs a reward. Why specifically the reward of Arichas Yamim? Because mida keneged mida. Either because that's what kavod adds up to. Kavod means they're doing what they can to prolong the parent's life, let them live longer. So that's what the child deserves. And even more, there's a lot of children out there who don't want the parent to live longer because it's not in their financial best interest of the kids for the parent to live longer, either because it's going to diminish the Yerusha, the inheritance, or because it's costing the kids an arm and a leg. So if the child can overcome that instinct, that financial boogeyman in the back of the mind, and say, no, I'm going to be machabed, the parent, then that child really deserves longevity. Fascinating. But again, what made me think of this Tosefes Bracha this week, even though it's on last week's Parsha, is because look how this dovetails so nicely with the first piece we saw in that Ramban. The Ramban was saying that since it's more likely for a child to curse a parent than hit a parent, that's why the Torah had to disincentivize cursing a parent more than hitting a parent. So now because it's of the two, that's the one that's more likely to happen. So the Torah had to disincentivize it by offering a harsher death penalty. Now we're seeing also that when it comes to being mechabed a parent, that sometimes it could be more of a challenge to show kavod to a parent. So that's why the Torah had to incentivize it to show kavod to a parent. So I thought this was fascinating. Torah understanding human nature. On one hand, it has to disincentivize a negative action, but it also has to incentivize a positive action. I thought that's fascinating. Now, I want to share with you one more source that deals with this, and that is Rav Schwab. Rav Schwab deals with this. Rav Shimon Schwab, in his commentary to the Chumash, I saw it both in the Hebrew, but I also saw it in English. So let me show you in the English. So he's bothered by the same question as the Ramban, is that these 3 psukim, you have Makeh Vivimo, someone who strikes a parent, then you have Gonei Vishumachro, someone who kidnaps another Jew and sells him, and then you've got Mekalel Vivimo, someone who curses a parent. So it looks like you broke up the flow by sticking the kidnapper in the middle there. So why did it do that? So the Ramban told us the Gemara's answer, and he also told us Rav Saadia Gaon's answer. Here's the third answer from Rav Schwab. I thought this is very interesting. It has to do with ideas of chinuch, child raising. Look what he writes here. Why does the Torah insert the laws regarding a kidnapper between 2 psukim that discuss the punishment of one who abuses his parents by striking or cursing them? Right? The same questions bothered the Ramban. Ramban gave us the Gemara's answer and Rav Saadia Gaon. So here Rav Schwab's answer. It's difficult to understand how a person could sink so low as to curse or strike a parent. Perhaps here the Torah is revealing to us circumstances that could spur a child to resort to such behavior. The Gemara in Kedushin states, as long as your hand is upon your child's neck, you should discipline him. Meaning, once the hand is not on the child's neck, stop discipline. There comes a point in life where a parent should stop disciplining a child. And as the parents can discipline their children only until a certain age. There comes a time when children will no longer accept their parents' admonition and instruction, and parents must recognize this fact. Beyond that point, parents should not attempt to discipline their children or dictate to them. Fascinating, because human nature is that, we all want to be disciplinarians. We all want to point out another person's fault and tell them what they're doing wrong. When it comes to a parent, at a certain point, it's counterproductive to do that. Once that child is beyond that stage, it could hurt that relationship far worse. Stop doing that. That's what the Gemara is telling us in Kedushin. If a parent insists on dominating their children's lives, treating them like captives, stifling their desire for freedom or self-expression, it can be said that the parents are kidnapping their children. Parents must be very careful not to overeducate their children, snuffing out all their creativity. Since this kind of kidnapping can sometimes cause a child to rebel and chas v'shalom, even hit or curse the parents, the prohibition against kidnapping is inserted between the 2 psukim. What a fascinating theory. What Rav Schwab is suggesting is another answer. It's not a breakup. The Torah knew exactly what he was doing, Rav Schwab is suggesting. The Torah knew exactly what it was doing. It says, Make Aviv, someone who strikes the parent. And then it says a kidnapper. And then it says Mekalel, someone who curses a parent. What's that doing there? Because that activity, kidnapping, not the traditional kidnapper, but a parent who's trying to squash that child's independence beyond the age of chinuch, beyond the age of adulthood, you might say, where that child is supposed to be independent and needs to be independent, and a parent is still acting like that child is a little kid and needs to be disciplined and needs to be forced into a certain mold, that's incredibly counterproductive. That's akin to kidnapping. And now that can lead to what came before or after it. That could lead to the makeh vivimo. That could lead to striking a parent. That could lead to makal. That could lead to cursing a parent. I thought that's a fascinating idea, but it's also a very, very important lesson that, again, does not come naturally, I think, to most of us. I don't mean just to pick on some domineering parent. I think most of us, we feel the need to get involved, especially if it's a family member and especially a parent to a child. It's hard to bite one's tongue when they feel they really see someone doing something which they don't agree with. But at a certain point, it's just not productive to do that. And it requires biting the tongue. Not easy at all. Let's see one last idea from Rav Sorotskin, because we know how we love looking at Rav Sorotskin's thoughts on the Torah. So let's see. Later in this parsha is a famous line. Midvar sheker tirchak. We have to distance ourselves from any sense of falsehood. V'naki v'tzadik al ta'arog. Do not kill a truly innocent person, kilo atzdik rasha, because I will not vindicate a guilty person. So let's focus on the first part of the pasuk. Midvar sheker tirchak. We have to distance ourselves from falsehood. Let's see Rav Sorotskin. Midvar sheker tirchak. Etzem azhara shalol adaber sheker. The actual prohibition against speaking lies, mefurish beParshas Kedoshim, is much later in the Torah. It's in Sefer Vayikra and Parshas Kedoshim. It says, Lo shakru ish ba'amito. It says there that one Jew is not supposed to lie to another Jew. That's where it says, don't lie. So what's this pasuk? Midvar sheker tircha. Distance ourselves. I don't need this pasuk. Just tell me, don't lie in Parshas Kedoshim. What's this pasuk teaching us? Ela shekan is here. Here the Torah is telling us something completely different. Here the Torah is not telling us don't lie. That happens in Parshas Kedoshim, where it says, Lo shakru ish ba'amito. What does it mean when the Torah says Midvar sheker tircha? Here the Torah is telling us, even at times in life where a person has to lie, there are times where we're allowed to lie and even required to lie. The Torah tells us, the Gemara tells us in Yevamos rather, that we are allowed to lie if it's going to promote peace. And there are other times, he's saying there are times where we're allowed to lie, times where we have to lie. But even when we have to lie, let's not get carried away with it. Let's at least try to lie and choose words that can at least be interpreted in two ways. That maybe you could look at that and interpret it for the truth. Maybe you could interpret it as a lie, but it's not a flat out lie. What's an example? He goes, that's what the Torah is telling us here. Midvar sheker tirchak. Distance ourselves from sheker, even when I have to lie because I'm lying for shalom or I'm lying to save someone's life, something like that. I should try to use the littlest lie, the smallest lie possible. Midvar sheker tirchak. Utilize falsehood to the least amount possible. What's an example? Rashi tells us this is Divrei Yaakov Laviv. When Yaakov was stealing the brachos from his brother Esav, and his father Yitzchak asks him, "Who are you?" He says, "Anochi." Kama, Esav b'charecha. Esav is your firstborn. Rashi explains, Anochi. He said, I am who I am. Hamevi locha. I'm the guy who's bringing you the food. Esav hu b'charecha. Oh, by the way, Esav's your firstborn. That's how Rashi tells us why Yaakov chose those words. Why did he choose to say, Anochi Esav b'charecha? He didn't say, Ani Esav b'charecha. He didn't just say, Esav b'charecha. Why did he say that word, Anochi? Why Anochi? Yitzchak asked, who are you? Just says, Esav. I'm Esav. Why did he say, Anochi, Esav b'charecha? He was trying to lie, but in a sense to minimize the falsehood. He was saying, Anochi, I am who I am. Esav b'charecha. Esav's your firstborn. That's what he was saying. And also a little bit later in that same incident, when Yitzchak asked him, Atozeh b'ni Esav, are you really my son Esav? He didn't answer. He didn't answer. Ani Esav. Yeah, I'm Esav. Ella, all he said was, Ani. I am who I am. Yaakov chose his words in fulfillment of Midvar Sheker Tirchak. That's what he was doing. Yes, Yaakov was lying, but he had to lie. Rivka, his mother, told him to. And this was the future of Bnei Yisrael is hinged on this. But even when he was lying, he had to minimize it. He was trying to minimize as much as possible. Hooray, what do you see from this? Even though he had to lie for a great reason, he couldn't totally not lie. He had to lie. Nonetheless, he did his best he could. The words he chose at least he chose words that could be translated two ways to make it that he minimized the lie. His words wasn't 100% absolute lies. He didn't choose words that could only be interpreted as lies. He chose words that could be interpreted another way. I brought down the psukim and the Rashis, but I'm going to end with this. When I saw this, I said, boom, I had a crazy flashback to something which occurred almost 30 years ago. Crazy how time flies, almost 30 years ago. And I sent this letter to one of my Rabbeim yesterday, Rabbi Zakkai. Rabbi Peretz Zakkai is a tzaddik. He's a massive Talmud Chacham. He's one of the Rabbeim in the Beis Medrash in Witz, in the yeshiva in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's the yeshiva I attended for high school. And it's also the yeshiva I spent a year and a half studying in their Beis Medrash. I love Rabbi Zakkai. I loved him as a Rebbe. I still love him to this day. I just to see him, it makes me smile. He was so tamim, and such purity, and so sincere. So look at this letter. When I saw this as Naim Torah, I had to write to Rabbi Zakkai. I wrote this letter to him yesterday. It's in the mail. It's on its way to Milwaukee as we speak. So here's the letter, 23rd of Shvat, which was yesterday, February 14th. Dear Rabbi Zakkai, I hope you and your family are well. While preparing a Parshas HaShavua class on Parshas Mishpatim last night, I hit the enclosed piece in Rav Zalman Sorotzkin's Znaim Torah that triggered my memory. I remember I was learning in Witz's Beis Medrash back in either 93, 94, or it was 94, 95. You said over a shmooze, he would give a weekly a talk on Musar, an ethics talk on Parshas Toldos, which made a strong impression on me. You worked with Rashi's comments on the honesty which Yaakov employed at the time he tricked Yitzchak into giving him the brachas and closed. I gave him this page with those psukim, the Rashis, and also the Znaim Torah. You really caught my attention when you declared, this must be the most misunderstood Rashi in all of Chumash. You continued, most people look at Rashi and say, aha, terrific. Yaakov wasn't lying after all. There's a clever way to split his words and say he was really telling the truth. But how can we say that? After all, Yaakov was thoroughly engaged in sheker from start to finish. That was Rabbi Zakkai's question on the Rashi. How do you look at this Rashi and say, he told the truth? He didn't tell the truth. He was dressed up like Esav. He had the goat skins on his hand. He's wearing Esav's clothes. He's lying from start to finish. What's Rashi telling us? You went on to explain that what Rashi really meant was that, of course, Yaakov lied, but he was extremely cautious to minimize the sheker he had to speak. Yaakov's attitude was not, now that I've got a heter to lie, I'm going to run with it and tell all the lies I can. To the contrary, Yaakov's attitude was, okay, given the circumstances that I'm in, I have to lie. However, what's the least amount of lying I can do and still accomplish all that needs to be done in this situation? Yaakov didn't want to take one step overboard and lie more than he had to. To the contrary, Yaakov contained himself and tried his best to lie as little as he possibly could. From this Rashi, we learn that just because one finds himself in a scenario where it's mutter to lie, where it's allowed to lie, he still needs to limit his lying as much as possible. When I saw this piece from the Znaim Torah, I remembered your shmooze, and I thought that I have to reach out and share this supporting source with you. Rabbi Zakkai, Yasher Koach again on all the beautiful shmoozing you shared with us, and that you continue to share with the yeshiva. You may not always realize it, but your shmoozim do in fact leave everlasting impressions on your talmidim, on your students. Wishing you many more years of sharing your Divrei Torah in good health. Sincerely, Akiva, Memphis, Tennessee. This letter's on its way to Milwaukee. I know he's going to smile, and that's the least I could do. I have a beloved Rebbe. The least I could do is express some hakaras hatov when that opportunity comes my way, and that's exactly what happened. So I thought this was amazing. I saw this idea in the Znaim Torah, and I had this flashback going back almost 30 years ago. And it came and how that enabled me to express my hakaras hatov. The letter's on its way, and God willing, it'll bring some joy to Rabbi Zakkai's heart. And I'm sure no matter how old someone is, no matter how experienced they are, we all need chizuk. We all need a pat on the back. We all need a yasher koach. We all need some encouragement, and we all know how good that feels. I feel privileged to the fact that it's on its way, and I know it's going to be warmly accepted by him. I wanted to share that with you, but also I just thought it was so cool to see that here it is. That's what we say, Baruch Shekivanti. When someone came up with something and then they saw a greater mind than theirs, thought of it earlier, they don't get depressed and say, oh man, there it was. I thought I came up with something novel. No, they say to the contrary, I'm so glad. I thought of the same idea that Sorotzkin did. There's no greater, more reassuring feeling than when you're hiking in the woods and you realize you're not trailblazing, you're not making a new path. You're on a path that others have walked down before. That means you're headed in the right direction. That's the attitude we have when we learn Torah, and I'm sure that's what Rabbi Zakkai is going to feel when he sees this as Naim LaTorah, when he sees what Rav Sorotzkin said. It's going to make him feel great, and I think it's going to also make him feel great to know that what he said close to 30 years ago resonated with someone. Someone wrote it down. It's in their notes, and they're still thinking about it when they saw this. And I just feel so good to be able to make a beloved Rebbe feel good. All right, with that, I'm going to end our recording.